joining our webinar today. Today we're going to be talking about encouraging the 16 habits of mind. And just for anybody who isn't already familiar with the 16 habits of mind, Art Costa and Bena Kallick came up with these 16 habits of mind about a decade ago. And they analyzed the dispositions of successful sports and business people and how they solve problems in order to develop these habits. So they've gone a little bit beyond what Stephen R. Covey did with the 7 habits of highly successful people and really delved into a greater breadth of habits that we need to work on developing in both our kids and students. Today what we're going to be focused on is listening with understanding and empathy, which is one of the 16 habits. So, you know, as Sir John Powell said, a good listener truly wants to know the speaker. And what Daniel Goleman found in his book that was published back in 2011, Brain and Emotional Intelligence, and Daniel Goleman, for anybody who's not familiar with him, is one of the people who came up with the concept and the idea of EQ, which is emotional intelligence. And only in the last 5 to 10 years have researchers really started to study 2 brains and 2 bodies while they interacted. And now we realize that the human brain is peppered with what they are calling mirror neurons. So, you know, a lot of us think about mirroring being what a psychologist tells us to do when we're in couples counseling on the couch and we're trying to learn how to communicate better and we're mirroring each other. Well, you know, we are naturally wired to mirror in that way, which to me is absolutely fascinating. As we talk through this presentation, we're going to be talking about the 8 types of learners. And for anyone who is familiar with Myers-Briggs, you may look at these codes and say, well, wait, isn't it supposed to be 4 characters and not 3? In Myers-Briggs, yes, they do go to the 4-character level, but because kids focuses in on kindergartners through 8th graders, we focus in on, instead on the 8 types of learners because kids at those ages have only really established their dominant type, which is the single middle character. They haven't gone to the nuanced double character in the middle. So we focus on introverted sensors, introverted feelers, extroverted sensors, extroverted thinkers, extroverted intuitives, introverted intuitives, and introverted thinkers. And pay close attention to these codes. You'll see them through all of our webinars and through really all of our materials, including my book, A Parent's Playbook for Learning, because there are different ways that different types interpret the world and interact with the world. And so I try and make it as clear as possible in everything that I do, which ones your kids are so that you can really key into the types that are most relevant to you. And for teachers, you'll see these types in your students if you have a classroom account with us. So be able to key into the icons may help you identify some of the techniques that will work better for them, particularly if you have struggling students or behavioral issues. So we'll go ahead and get started with the 8 types of learners and how they listen with understanding and empathy. And as you'll see with everything, you know, each time a message is sent, it's encoded at the sender's end and it's decoded at the receiver's end. And if you've got 2 people of 2 very different types, they may be using the wrong translation handbook. So that's why type is so critical to not only start working with between parents and kids and teachers and kids, but helping kids understand that the ways that we each interpret the world are different. There's perception and there's reality, and all of us perceive the world a little bit differently. And when we add all of our perceptions together, that's when we really get a clear view of reality. You know, without empathy, we're all the blind men who are feeling out the empathy, thinking that we've got the right idea, saying, it's a fan, it's a sphere, it's a wall, it's a rope, it's a tree, it's a snake. Wait, you're all right. But really what it is all of those combined to form what's real. So that's why we need to have empathy, and we need to have all of our kids and all of our teachers and all of our parents understanding that type is really important. It's not just about personality traits. its type and their views of the world. For the mind of an extroverted feeler, this is the type that has the easiest time in terms of communicating with and listening with understanding and empathy. They're really skilled at tactful, compassionate, positive interactions with other people, which are the keys to successful listening and successful empathy. Some of the things that they think about as they're having conversations with people and as they're listening is, if our body language is in harmony, then our minds will be too, and so they're really keyed into that being in sync non-verbally as well as verbally. How can we put a positive spin on what she's feeling? What is he saying that might signal trouble in our relationship that I can help to remedy? Am I responding to and fully appreciating his needs? These are the things that the extroverted feeler really keys into. And one of the contributions of Richard Balagne to understanding, listening, and empathy is he identified several different listening blocks. And all of the different types have different blocks that they are more inclined to encounter. For an extroverted feeler, their listening block is in the placating realm. They try and be amicable instead of getting a good understanding of the overarching message. In general, this isn't as much of an issue for an extroverted feeler as you'll see for an introverted feeler, but this does tend to be one of the listening blocks that they encounter most frequently. So if you've got an extroverted feeler in your house, make sure that they understand that placating isn't something that's going to do them justice when it comes to listening. They need to be able to listen and then respond and try and figure out a solution, not just, oh, yes, you're right, you're right, you're right. You need to be able to appreciate their challenges and understand what needs to be fixed as well and help them identify what needs to be fixed. That's part of successful listening with understanding and empathy. For an introverted feeler, while they're skilled at peacekeeping and are really great at saying, how can we interact respectfully with each other? How can we bring our relationship back into harmony? How can I help improve his life here and now? How can I show her that I appreciate her opinion? These are the kinds of internal dialogues that an introverted feeler will have, but more so than the extroverted feeler, they will have listening blocks not only on the placating side, which is that trying to be amicable instead of getting a good understanding of the overarching message, but they will also have listening blocks on the being right side because they're so value-based. Introverted feelers tend to become defensive to prove that they are not in the wrong versus fully listening to the other side of the story. So if you have an introverted feeler in your house, these are the types of things to be really keyed into and help them to overcome. And it's going to be a challenge because it's particularly for an introverted feeler, these are really hardwired. So it's going to be a lot more challenging for them to get around these particular listening blocks. For an extroverted sensor, they're incredibly skilled at tuning into the body language and the tangible problems, and then adapting these insights to the needs of others. The things that they will miss are going to be a lot more on the underlying meanings of things. For an extroverted sensor, actions speak a lot louder than words. They'll get frustrated if the speaker is focused on the past or the future because their view is that the present is all that really matters. They ask questions like, what are you feeling that impacts us here and now? How can we make today better? They're focused on present tense. And a couple of the blocks that they will come up against will be on the derailing side. If they don't find the topic relevant in the moment, they will derail it onto something that's happening right now. So that is a really challenging listening block for them. And on the opposite side of the fence, they will miss the filtering process. They'll listen to what's at face value and they'll filter out what the underlying message might be. So these are two aspects to really key into if you have an extroverted sensor to help them become a better listener. Work on these two areas. For an introverted sensor, they're tremendously skilled at overlaying what they see and hear now based on their past experience. So they'll look at in some of the internal dialogues that they will have as they're listening are, okay, remind me again what the rules are. What were the rules for empathetic listening? And they will try and follow those rules as much as possible. You know, what's a sensible solution based on what's worked before? Oh, wait, this reminds me of X. I'll bet she's feeling the same way. So again, you know, overlaying present experience with past experience. What are her basic needs? There'll be a lot more keyed into the details, and again, what that surface value. You know, some of their listening blocks are comparing. The tendency to compare while listening can lead to distraction from the speaker's message. So really staying in the moment is a challenge for them, and listening with understanding and empathy without trying to do that comparison while the other person is talking. Identifying, making connections to past experiences and keeping ours in our mind instead of listening to the new perspective. So they'll miss the details of the new because they are recollecting what happened in the old. And again, for ISJs, they had the same kind of challenge with filtering that the extroverted sensor did, and missed the underlying message and focus in on what they're seeing versus what they're feeling as an undercurrent. For an extroverted thinker, and again, the icons up at the top should indicate to you whether or not that is, I'm talking about one of your children or one of your students. They are incredibly skilled at listening for logical problems to be solved. So, you know, a lot of what they'll be talking about is, how do I need to reorganize my perspective based on what he's saying? What action can I take to eliminate any confusion? How can we amend the rules to resolve this problem ASAP? Are there any flaws in her observations? These are the challenges that we really key into as an extroverted thinker. And one of the things that I did want to mention as we went through these is that you may start to see some of these blocks and some of these types of questions come up for your kids, even if it's not the identical type, and especially as they get older, because what will happen is they'll start to dabble a little bit into the other characters. So for thinkers, they won't really go into the feeling realm, but they may dabble a little bit in the sensor or intuitive realm. So you'll see some of those strengths as well as some of those blocks come into play. So kind of keep an eye out for those. But these are the ones that are on each screen are the ones that are most likely to appear for your kids, and the ones to key into as real strengths for them, and then also the ones to key into as the blocks and to help them overcome. For an ETJ, their listening blocks are in the advice realm, tendency to focus on the solution instead of the actual act of listening to the speaker, and this can be a tremendous challenge for thinkers and feelers as they talk with each other, because the feeler will really want them to listen with that affect and that empathy, and the thinker will be focused on problem solving and solution, and so there'll be a miscommunication that happens there. The other challenge that happens a lot between thinkers and feelers is that they will start to argue. The thinker will start to argue, and the arguments and debates interrupt the flow of communication and can really shift the focus from the original intent of the conversation, and it'll really be a real challenge for the feeler on the other end of that listening. And when you look at the way that the thinker felt, I'll go back for a second, the way that the extroverted thinker felt, you can see how differently they are listening than those feelers on the other side. So, you know, if a feeler is encoding a message and a thinker is trying to decode that message, if they don't understand the personality types of others, then they may look at it as, he's just not listening to me, he just doesn't get me, when really he's just interpreting the situation and the conversation a little bit differently. So particularly if you have kids in a classroom or siblings in a family that are having challenges together, this may be at the root of it in terms of how they're encoding versus decoding. So now we'll move on to the mind of an introverted thinker. Introverted thinkers, they're really skilled at listening intently with the aim to find the most efficient solution. So they may not be speaking up as much as they're listening, but they're really analyzing what the speaker is saying versus empathizing with what the speaker is saying. So, they'll look at, he told me the Y problem and the Z solution, so what X variable will fix it? And these are the kinds of internal dialogues they'll be having as they listen. What solution would take the least amount of effort and yield the best return based on what the speaker is saying? What are the objective facts that she's sharing? Not so much the emotional opinions, but the objective facts. And they'll look at how can I remove emotion from this equation, because they don't necessarily think of emotion as being something that is really relevant in terms of decision making. The ITP's listening blocks are scrutiny. They will change a conversation into an analytical argument that doesn't allow the speaker to get to the heart of his or her message. And then rehearsal. And rehearsal is actually a challenge for many of the introverts, particularly introverts on the far end of the continuum, because of their tendency to reflect and need to reflect before they offer up their response. They will have a tendency to get ready for their next comment during a conversation and lose important pieces of what the speaker is saying. The other challenge for introverts, if they don't have this rehearsal challenge, will be more on the extrovert side, because what will happen is that they will listen, the introvert will listen through the entire conversation, and when the extrovert is ready for them to respond, the introvert will need a little bit more time to digest what's just been said to them before they can make a good response to the introvert. And this is something that comes up so many times between extroverts and introverts, where the introverts feel like they're not really listening to what I'm saying because they participate in more layered conversations, whereas the extroverts feel like the introverts, aren't really paying attention to what they're saying because they take so long to respond while they're reflecting. So that can be a real challenge between your extroverts and your introverts, and something to watch for, both in your classrooms and in your homes. For extroverted intuitives, they're tremendously skilled at reading between the lines and switching perspectives. Their internal dialogue will be a lot more along the lines of, what's my gut trying to tell me telling me she's trying to say? How can I turn this negative into a positive? Any obstacle can be overcome. What options might work? The more we brainstorm, the more we'll discover, and the sooner we'll find a solution. So they'll be off in the realm of ideas and possibilities, and they'll take, initial things that a speaker says and be off almost internally brainstorming while the other person is talking. And that can be a real challenge because they'll miss some of the key details that may make for better gut decisions. So for the ENP's listening blocks, you'll see that dreaming is a big challenge for them. They have a tendency to make connections in their minds that trigger a chain of private associations instead of listening to the speaker. And they'll also, they want to be mind readers. They have a tendency to make predictions about what the speaker is about to say instead of listening to what is actually said. And while that can be a strength in some cases, it can also be a weakness because they are missing those key details. And for sensors and intuitives who are speaking with each other and having miscommunications, it can be a real challenge because the sensor is giving all these details and the intuitive feels like those details are superfluous, but the sensor will feel like they're important and critical aspects of what they're trying to communicate and what they're trying to say. And vice versa, the intuitive will make these gut judgments and these gut, they'll have these gut feelings about what's being said, and as they try and mirror back what the censor just said, the censor will say, well, that's not what I said at all. I said this and this and this. So that can be a real source of miscommunication between censors and intuitives. They just look at things completely differently. The censors take it at face value, and the intuitives feel like they're reading between the lines. For an introverted intuitive, tremendously skilled at unearthing the meaning behind the words. They want to know how they can clarify her ideas. How can his insights be used to empower us to live better lives? They won't be so focused on listening and understanding to make a difference in the present tense. They'll be looking at it as, okay, what impact does this new understanding have for me in the far future? How can I make things better in the far future? What changes can I make today to make an impact, for everyone? More of a global focus. I hear what she's saying, but what does she really mean? Is a question that they'll often ask themselves, because for an intuitive, they don't feel like they get the full idea of what's going on from what's to be taken at face value. They think that there are always underlying currents that come along with listening and understanding. And again, how can I best help fix this problem in the long run? So really a future focus on for the introverted intuitive. For an introverted intuitive, their listening blocks tend to be in the dreaming realm, the tendency to make connections in their minds that trigger a chain of private associations instead of listening to the speaker. So they'll miss out on those details and those nuances that are so important to the censor who's feeding them lots of details. And then the judging side, the jumping to conclusions based on prior experiences and make judgments before having heard the speaker out. And this judging is a real challenge, not just for your introverted intuitive or your INJ, but for all of the judging personality types. The extroverted feeler will tend to jump to conclusions, trying to resolve the issues as quickly as possible. Extroverted thinkers will do the same thing, as will introverted censors. So be aware that judging may come up as an issue for all of your judging personality types, INJ, ISJ, ETJ, and EFJ. Some activities and strategies to stretch and strengthen this habit of mind. One of the reasons it's so important and so critical to strengthen this particular habit of mind is that Daniel Goleman, again, from the Brain and Emotional Intelligence in 2011, found that when a global company studied its star performers, they discovered that the emotional intelligence talents that made these executives outstanding had started to emerge very early in life. So that's why we really need to focus on strengthening emotional intelligence as early as possible. And there also have been studies that have shown that kids with high EQ tend to perform better on SATs and in terms of academic types of achievements than the kids with high IQ. So, it's not necessarily something just for the work world. It's also for their academic careers that it's really important that they start to key into emotional intelligence. Whether it's a strength or a struggle for them, this is something that kids need to start practicing as early as possible. And like Dr. Judy Willis says, one of my very favorite neuroscientists, especially in the education field, practice makes permanent. So, you're myelinating these strands or these neural pathways when you're helping your kids develop these habits of mind. According to Tixanian and Rosenthal in The Nature of Rapport and its Nonverbal Correlates, there are 3 key ingredients of rapport. The first is to tune in fully to the other, putting aside distractions. Number 2 is being in sync non-verbally, how our body moves in relationship to another. And the third is positive feeling. And then Daniel Goleman identified 3 different types of empathy. So we need to key into not only the 3 types of rapport, but the 3 types of empathy. There's cognitive empathy, I can see how you see things. Emotional empathy, I feel with you. And there's empathetic concern, I sense you need help, and I'm ready to give it. So these are the 3 types of empathy that we need to help our kids build on. In order to tune in fully and put aside distractions, one of the ideas that you might want to take to your classroom or to your home is to make conversation platforms. You can cook up more opportunities to practice listening at dinner or at lunch at school. If you print out the placemats that we've got a template on kidsmit.com/files/dinner-dish.pdf that you're welcome to download at any time, and we recommend laminating them and using them over and over again. You can hand those placemats out before dinner each evening and have each family member write conversation topics with dry erase markers. One of the things that we like to do at our house is we kick it up a notch with theme nights, and we have specific conversation topics that we talk about, and we can see, in that way we can see all the different kinds of perspectives that are going on. And one of the really valuable things about doing it at a mealtime is because you've got all sorts of distractions as you're eating and as you're trying to remember all your table habits. And while you're doing that, you need to be tuned in fully to what the other people are saying. So you're really working on being able to listen while other things are going on. And putting aside those distractions is particularly important for extroverts. So the more that you can do to help them put aside external distractions is going to be really valuable. Again, with tuning in fully and putting aside distractions, we have, I was a musical kid, so musical mnemonics and auditory mnemonics always worked really well for me. And when I was crossing the street, or when I was learning to cross the street, there was a song that my mom used to sing, which was, stop, look, and listen before you cross the street. Use your eyes, use your ears, and then use your feet. And you can do some kind of a riff on that, reminding your kids to stop, look, and listen when someone starts to talk, because they need to not only be listening to what the other person says, but they need to be looking for those nonverbal cues and getting in sync with those nonverbal cues that we talked about earlier. So, you can say something along the lines of stop, look, and listen when someone starts to talk. Use your eyes, use your ears, and then use your mouth. Doesn't have such a great rhyme to it, but it does have that message inside, and it may be easier for your kids that do better with auditory mnemonics to remember to stop when someone else is talking, look at them for their nonverbal cues, and listen to them with their ears as well. In terms of getting in sync nonverbally, we talked a little bit about how to clue them into it with that last auditory mnemonic, but getting in sync nonverbally helps build cognitive empathy as well. So one of the things that I like to recommend is doing a senza voce video. So watch a short film or video with your kids or students. It doesn't have to be long. It can be 5 minutes, it can be 10 minutes, that the kids have not seen before with the sound off. And then talk to them about, what was happening with the characters in the scene. What about their faces or touches or body language made it seem this way? How do the characters feel about each other? This can be really great for keying into what they're seeing versus what they're hearing. And then if you can rewind that video or, replay that video with the sound on, they can see how on target they were in terms of what they thought was going on versus what was really going on once they heard the words. And, you can try the same exercise while you're people watching in the park or at the playground, at the grocery store. It's really helping them to identify those nonverbal cues that are so important when it comes to empathy. Expanding your listening vocabulary really helps to build emotional empathy. And we talked about mirror neurons earlier. So, one of the exercises I like to recommend is mirror, mirror. Taking 10 minutes to do a daily virtues pick, which you can do at virtuesproject.org with either your students or your kids. You can talk to your kids or students about words like respectful, purposeful, courageous, and there are a myriad of other ones. Talk to them about what those words mean. Then take an opportunity to think, pair, share about when they felt that way or what makes them feel that way. There's so many of these different words. You don't have to be just limited to, I think he looks happy, I think he looks sad, I think he looks worried, I think he looks proud, I think he looks scared. There are a variety of different words that you can use that really help them key into that emotional empathy and the feeling behind all of those words. And again, with this one, have each partner mirror back how the other felt and why. It's having them paraphrase what the other person said, so that way there's, again, that help encoding and decoding and making sure that they're translating correctly and understanding how differently things can be interpreted. These emotions can be interpreted, and what causes these emotions to happen, and for each different type of personality. Positive thinking, this really builds empathetic concern. Good vibrations, talk about situations or comments that really push your buttons, and then brainstorm ways to diffuse the situation while staying on topic, and then practice them at home. Talk about what makes you sad or hurt. What could somebody else do to make you feel better? Practice giving that solace. And like we talked about earlier on in the presentation, when you start to form a habit, it's those connections start to happen from the first time you practice it, but in order for it to become a really permanent habit and to overcome any bad habits you might have and replace them with good habits, it's going to take you 3 to 6 months of consistent practice. So being able to do games or exercises with your kids, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes, will help build on that repertoire. So, and this will help them, particularly when they get into a situation where it's really easy to get inflamed and come back with a retort that might be misinterpreted. Knowing how to help diffuse those feelings on their end and how they might be able to diffuse feelings on the other end will really be a tremendous skill for them in the empathetic concern realm. Next week, what we're going to be talking about is clarity and precision in thoughts and words. So again, as you can see, talent and elegance mean nothing without precision and rigor. This is going to be a strength for certain personality types, more of a struggle for others. There are going to be different aspects to the strengths and different aspects to the struggles that we're going to be covering. So I hope you'll be joining us next week on our webinar. And if you are interested, you can pick up a copy of A Parent's Playbook for Learning, which is my book, and the topics include organization and time management, approaching new concepts, homework and test prep, filing knowledge, group learning, enrichment activities, motivation, handling successes and failures. For each of the 8 types of learners that we talked about tonight, you can get the book on Amazon. You can order it at your local bookstore. You can also get it on Barnes & Noble, Ingram, Baker & Taylor, Kobo, and we're available on the Nook and on the Kindle and on in the iTunes store as well. So whatever your pleasure in terms of reading it, we have it available. Smashwords as well. And if you're interested in having me come to speak at your school, I do professional development for teachers. I also do parent education evenings and events. I often talk to book clubs or do virtual visits. So if you have any questions at all about any of those potential ideas about how we could help bring type understanding to your schools and to your neighborhoods, just go ahead and email me at jen.lilly@kismet.com to find out more. You can also find out more about Kismet and what we do online. We have free profiles for parents, and up until the end of this month, we have free classroom accounts, or a year free on Kismet. So that's up until March 31st, and then we may have ongoing specials, but it'll go back to $24 per year for teachers on April 1st. So if you are interested in getting a free classroom account for a year, definitely do so quickly. And you can find out more about us on Twitter @Kismet, on youtube.com/KismetGen, which is where you found where you'll find all of these webinars. on facebook.com/kidsmit, on kidsmit.com, and then also feel free to email me anytime at jen.lilly@kidsmit.com. I love hearing from parents and teachers, and if I can help you in any way, I would love to do so. And I am looking forward to speaking with you again next week as we talk about communicating with clarity and precision. And if you have any questions in the interim, I hope to hear from you via email or any of these places. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye now.